Today we're going to show you how to use some of the 3D view commands for working on models, and we've already done a video showing you how to use the commands in 2D. There's a carryover, of course, because the 3D program has a 2D planar viewing mode, and so you'll find that all the commands that you learned from that video, how to use the windowing commands, the zoom commands, and the panning commands, they all translate directly for a 3D view. Okay, so actually here what I'm showing, we're showing a Celsius, which is our 3D thermal program, viewing on a plane, much like the heatsink model that you saw in Kelvin before. And of course, all the commands are the same. So now we'll switch back to a full 3D viewing mode. And as you can see here, our heatsink is no longer just a simple cross-section, it's an actual 3D model. And you'll notice also that the view toolbar has some additional commands. It has all the windowing commands and the zooming and panning commands before, but it has commands which are specific to 3D viewing mode. The first thing that you'll want to do in 3D that you don't have to do in 2D is that often you want to rotate your model so you can look and work on different parts of it. There's a number of ways of doing that. Right on the view toolbar there's a rotate button. So if we click on that, now you notice as I move the mouse pointer onto the workspace, it has two curved arrows, and that indicates that it's ready to rotate. Now you hold down your left mouse button, and now you can rotate your view. And to end that command, you just right-click. You can also use on your computer keyboard the 4 arrow keys. Those also act to rotate the model. So here I'm just pressing the arrow keys, and if you hold down an arrow key, it'll just rotate continuously. Now, one of the problems that you'll find if you're using the rotate command can occur when you've zoomed in on a specific area. So let's use a window command, and let's just zoom in on one of these fins, a top part of the fin here. And suppose we wanted to rotate our orientation and look at different sections of this fin. So I'll just use the arrow keys on the keyboard, and you notice that quickly what happens is that it rotates out of your range of window view. So because that happens so frequently, we have a command which allows you to adjust the look at point, and that's also on the toolbar. Now the command line is telling you to select or enter a new point, and sometimes you may just want to enter the geometry coordinates. More often than not, you'll just want to pick a point, and that now becomes the new center of your model space. And now you notice what's happening when we rotate the view. It's rotating about that point. Normally, you'll use the toolbar to do that. It's generally easier to adjust the look at point there. Also, in the View Setup dialog box, you'll notice the View Setup, it contains the range of your coordinates, and it contains what is your look at point. And that will get reset according to the dimensions you set in the View Setup. So for instance, I'll make a change, and you notice that's reset. I'll change it to 1. Now, some other things you'll notice in the View Setup dialog box, there's a setting for rotation step. So right now the default is set to 10 degrees, and that's the rotation that occurs every time I hit one of the arrow keys on the keyboard. So if instead of 10, I make it something like 2 degrees, and now when I start using the arrow keys, you notice it's a much smoother rotation, because instead of jumping a 10 degree step for every mouse click or every time you hold down the key, now it's just rotating at 2 degrees. So that gives a nice finer manipulation possible. Something else you'll notice that occurs in the View Setup dialog box, you can pick what is your up axis. And you would like to use the Z axis as a default for the up axis. But in other programs, you may have a model that you've imported from another CAD package where the y-axis was the up-axis. So you can quickly change that. And you can do that on the fly using the Utilities toolbar. We also have that put there, so we can switch back to the z-axis very easily. I'll show you one last feature about rotation, and that's what's called the view direction. So that lets you assign a numerical value, and if you have to, let's say, do some kind of a presentation or a screen capture, maybe you've rotated your model to exactly the right view, and you think, well, what if I close the model or rotate it again? Could I ever get back to that viewpoint? And so that's why having an actual number of values for the view direction is handy. So if I click on that, you notice now it tells you the current view directions and as direction numbers. So for instance, I can enter, say, 1, 1, 1, and that gives you sort of like an isometric view direction there. In addition to the view toolbar, which you see both in 2D and 3D, in 3D we have a couple of other toolbars for adjusting your view. And one of those is the standard view button. Now the first group of speed buttons in the standard view, they allow you to quickly change the orientation. So you can look at, say, the front, the back. You can quickly go back to that isometric view. Now, something else which you don't really see so much in 3D unless you're, say, using a material table, we have a rendering options, several different views. So for instance, we can click on a solid view, and you can see that it shows a shaded view because this is a volume composed of solid surfaces. And the default view is a wireframe view, which is sometimes handy if you want to pick a coordinate point. You can have also a hidden line view and a translucent view, and those are kind of handy when you're rotating models. It gives you sort of a better feel for the 3D nature of a model. You can also have a solid with edges view and solid with translucent view. So for different types of presentations and for different types of work, it's handy to have these views. For instance, the solid view is handy if you have different materials. You can see what are the colors of the materials. Or if you have boundary conditions. This is a thermal model, so we have some boundary conditions assigned. And it's a lot easier to see the boundary conditions by looking at surfaces in a solid view. And the last toolbar button, which is very useful when you're working in 3D, is the visibility toolbar. So one of the key challenges in working with a 3D model is actually being able to isolate parts that you need to work on, because different parts of your model will need different boundary conditions or materials, and in a 3D model that becomes a challenge. In 2D everything is just laid out on a plane for you. It's easy to pick different regions. In 3D quite often you'll find that even being able to rotate your model view isn't always adequate. Sometimes one part is inside another, and you'd like to be able to just isolate that part and hide the surrounding materials. So for instance, you may want to hide a surface. Let's hide a couple of these surfaces. So we'll pick them. And you notice also when you have a solid view rendering, it's easy to see what you picked. And now when I right click, okay, so now you notice that I've made a couple of surfaces invisible. It's easier to see what's inside this heat sink. And maybe you want to actually toggle your visibility and instead work on those two surfaces. So that's what the toggle button allows you to do. And sometimes the easiest way to work on something is to choose this button here and hide everything, and then unhide a particular surface. So let's just say we wanted to work on this surface. We've hidden everything, and now when we right click, this is the only surface that's visible, and you can work on anything that you needed to do on that surface. Now, in other cases, you don't want to go all the way and hide features. Maybe you want to show a sort of like a transparent view, so you can see a sort of a ghost image of the outer structure, but you'd like to see also what's inside. So that's why we have a transparency control. Now it says, set the transparency, select surfaces. So let's pick these two surfaces. And now you notice, once you've picked your selection, you have a slider box opens, which allows you to vary the transparency. Okay, so now we have a transparent view, and you can sort of see the outer surfaces because they're not completely invisible, but you can also see what's going on inside. And you can quickly disable all the transparency by this button here. And so now the final thing I want to show you is how to show a section view. So sometimes you want to cut the model with a plane and look at it from either the outside or the inside. So that's where the section view button comes in handy. And you notice that when that opens, you can select the plane. In this case, the way the model is set up, the X-plane cuts it in half. Now we have a view where we've made part of it invisible. And you can also toggle between. You can reverse the direction. So hopefully this will give you a basic overview of the most commonly used commands, and you'll find it easier to work with your 3D models.